Hello, my name's Ben and this is my YouTube channel Soy Boy Wrestling, where I, Ben, a man with a beard, joins the oversaturated market of men with beards who talk about wrestling on YouTube. So in this first edition of my show, if you can call it a show, I'm going to give you 6 reasons why WWE should not bring back intergender wrestling. So at the 2019 Royal Rumble, Nia Jax entered the male Royal Rumble, being the first female wrestler to do so in a few years. And women's wrestling's come a long way since the last time this happened. She got in the ring, she eliminated one top level WWE superstar, and then got hit with a few finishes and eliminated herself. There's been there's been talk that this is a way of testing the waters to see how people would react to intergender wrestling. I'm not sure if that's true, but I'm going to give you 6 reasons as to why I don't think WWE should, and I don't think they will, bring intergender wrestling back in 2019. Reason the first. Referring to my notebook. So equality means equal to, obviously. And in other sports that has meant equal pay and equal opportunities to the male performers or competitors. It hasn't meant that women have faced off against males in pretty much all sports. And I think that should be replicated in WWE. It's obviously not a legitimate sport in the true sense, but even in sports such as gymnastics, men and women are kept separately. There are reasons for that to happen. And I think that if WWE is to try and replicate a sport, it is called sports entertainment, so there is an element of sport to it. Women and men should be kept separate so that it more successfully replicates legitimate sport. The second point is very closely linked to the first point, and that is wrestling's fake. WWE acknowledges that. It hasn't always, but pretty much since God knows when, they've acknowledged that it is fake. And that's right. The silliest thing they've really done for the majority of the existence of wrestling in this form is try and tell people that it was real. It's all obviously not real. Every time someone rebounds off the rope after an Irish whip, it shows it's not real. Every time a bad guy cheats and isn't suspended afterwards, or having their license to wrestle revoked, shows that it's not real. If a boxer does something like hit someone on the back with a steel chair when the referee's not looking, they'd be banned. It's obviously not real, and you should never have tried to convince anyone that it was really, unless it was like the very early days where it was long and boring and probably more accurately represented a fight. But for a long, long time, wrestling has been clearly fake. And in my opinion, I don't think anyone but the smallest of child has really ever believed that it was real. I knew when I grew up, it was never something that I thought was legitimate, and that was fine by me. But one thing they shouldn't do is acknowledge that it is fake on camera during the show. If like I know that Coronation Street isn't real. If I watch it, I don't expect them to keep turning around and telling me that it's not real. And women versus men in a combat sport isn't realistic. If it was realistic, they'd have done it in UFC. It isn't realistic. And I think that can take away from the suspension of disbelief. Like, I know people will say, well, Brock Lesnar against Finn Balor isn't realistic. Look at the weight difference. And that is a trope that we're used to in wrestling. If you watch wrestling with people that aren't wrestling fans, they will often point out the things that are obviously fake about the program. But there are just things that we're used to. So we're used to people running back off the ropes after an Irish whip. We're used to that sort of thing. We're used to the fact that bad guys cheat, and the comeuppance is never, well, you're suspended without pay for 6 years or something. It's just, the good guy has to deck you at some point. So I think that wrestling should be trying to not be fake whilst the show is on. You can admit it as much as you want on TV shows when you're being interviewed and stuff like that, even on your own Instagram page or whatever, that's fine. But when it comes to the bits of the show that are, well, when it comes to the shows themselves, it should be presented as a legitimate athletic sport. And aside from the things that are already in place that we're used to, I don't think we should be creating further things that make the sport look unrealistic. The fact is that intergender wrestling is something that exists on independent wrestling shows. And to be honest with you, I'm usually all right with that because the talent pool is probably less easy to get, especially in the past. You might have only had one woman in your area that you could book regularly, and any other female wrestler that you could book as well could possibly be not so good. To put them up against the men would be to make sure that the fans were going to get a good match. And the fans at a lot of these indie shows are very smarky, and they're there for work rate. It's not necessarily going to be your mainstream audience. And the suspension of disbelief for these people is possibly different. They're probably so used to seeing intergender wrestling now that it has maybe become its own thing that they're willing to overlook. And that is fine for those shows. But in WWE, they've shown that they don't treat this seriously. So, for example, the most recent situation with Nia Jax, she eliminated Mustafa Ali, and then got eliminated after an RKO from Randy Orton. And the next week on television, Randy Orton is saying to Mustafa Ali, "You were eliminated by a girl." So they're not taking it seriously. They're not treating Nia Jax as an equal. Randy Orton isn't a bad guy. He's basically a good guy, or a face. So you can see that they're not taking it seriously. So it's not going to benefit anyone. Definitely going to benefit women. Okay, seeing Nia Jax get hit by a 619 and an RKO, moves that you're never going to see performed in UFC, is fine. She's a wrestler. She's used to taking wrestling moves. These are not moves that are going to really do her any damage. That's completely all right. I wouldn't like to see it regularly, but it's not bothersome to see it once in a while. You know, it is what it is. But when you take the situation of intergender wrestling and treating the women and the men on the same level physically, so, you know, I'm not talking about taking away their opportunities to wrestle each other and their opportunities to earn the same money as the men, but when you put a man in a fight, a physical confrontation with a woman, and these are trained people, I'm not saying like every man could deck every woman if it came down to a legitimate fight, because I, for one, would lose a lot of fights to women, especially women in WWE. But when you take someone like Brock Lesnar and you put them in a fight with Liv Morgan, and we have a scene like the scene we had where Brock Lesnar had mounted Randy Orton and repeatedly forearmed him in the face until he was bleeding. That visual is an uncomfortable thing to see if it's Brock Lesnar performing that maneuver on Liv Morgan. It visually looks like domestic violence. It looks like abuse. And to be honest with you, even if you're comfortable with that and you're like, oh, well, it's fake, it doesn't matter, and it's what she signed up for, it's just part of the show, that's fine. But I don't see advertisers looking at it that way. I don't see parents of small children, who are the main audience for this show, really thinking that that's okay. So even if fans are comfortable with it at my age and the kids are comfortable seeing it, the parents are often going to be like, well, this isn't right, seeing this 300-pound man pummel this woman. And maybe rightly so. I just can't see it working for parents or for advertisers. And the fifth point is that WWE has just created some tag team belts. They've got a women's championship belt on NXT. They've got 2 on the main roster. Like I said, this new tag team belt. They've got a women's Royal Rumble specifically for the women. What are you going to do with that if you suddenly say that everyone is on a par. Everyone is able to fight for every belt. When Santino Marella won the women's battle royal at WrestleMania a few years ago, or when the first ever women's Money in the Bank match was not won by James Ellsworth, but he had a strong hand in it. He's looked down on. It's like, well, this is the championship for the women. This is their opportunity to shine. These different divisions are set up. It'd be like, well, why not have Brock Lesnar win the Cruiserweight title? WWE title maybe should be called the Men's WWE title, and the Women's should be called the Women's WWE title, and these things should be kept separate, because you've put all this time into establishing these titles for these people, and I think that's right. Why now throw that away? Like I said, would we be happy if the next Women's Royal Rumble we had it won by Mustafa Ali? Say he wins by eliminating Nia Jax at the end. No one wants that. I don't want it. And this is my show. My final point is, with how far the WWE women's division has come, with Becky Lynch essentially being the biggest star, her feud with Ronda Rousey and Charlotte Flair being the biggest thing, very likely to main event this year's WrestleMania, who's getting the rub from this? Who's it going to benefit? If the men's division is lacking something or waning in some way, why should the women, after a very small amount of time, start giving these men the rub, as it were? It's like that this division has pushed things forwards, and it's still in the middle of the women's evolution, in my opinion. It's still developing. We've got some great women's wrestlers there, and we just need to pad out that division with a lot of these NXT wrestlers who are great, like Io Shirai. Get them up there, and you've got a women's division that is going to be difficult to beat. And why would we start trying to get the men involved in the women's division in order to get them back on top? They should get back on top through their own merit, rather than trying to take the shine off these women. Even if the woman in this case we're talking about is Nia Jax, who has very little shine. She's got a good character. She just punches people in the face sometimes. Still, I just don't think that the men should be getting involved in the women's division. But, you tell me what you think in the comments section below, and tell me I'm completely wrong. And that's fine. Anyway, thanks. Bye.